Imagine raising a child with all your love, all your sacrifices, believing they'll always have your back, only to wake up one day and realize they've chosen someone else. My son, my own son, chose his wife's family and forgot I even existed. Every phone call felt like a test. Every visit felt like an afterthought. The laughter, the love, the bond we had, it was gone. And I was left wondering, after everything, do I even matter to him? The first time I realized my son had chosen another family over me, it wasn't during a fight. It wasn't when voices were raised or doors were slammed. It was during silence, the kind of silence that arrives without warning and settles in so deeply that you don't notice it until it has already changed everything. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, rereading the same message I had sent hours earlier. It was simple, nothing dramatic, just a question. Did you arrive safely? I knew he had. I'd seen the photos online, smiling faces, new relatives. A celebration I wasn't part of. Still, I waited. Mothers do that. We wait even when we already know the answer. When the reply finally came, it was short, polite, distant. He said yes, nothing else. No warmth, no follow-up, no I miss you, no I'll call later. Just a confirmation, like responding to a stranger. That was the moment something inside me quietly cracked. I told myself not to overthink it, that newly married couples are busy, that love rearranges priorities, that I was being sensitive. Mothers learn early how to make excuses for the people they love. We call it understanding. We call it patience. We call it unconditional love. But deep down, I felt something shift. After the wedding, things didn't go back to normal. They moved forward without me. Family dinners stopped being discussed with me and started happening without me. Holidays were suddenly complicated. Birthdays were acknowledged with late messages instead of visits. Every time I asked when I'd see him, there was a pause before the answer, as if he were checking with someone else before responding. And he was. I noticed how his voice changed when he talked about her family. It became lighter, more animated. He spoke about their traditions, their gatherings, their opinions. He spoke with pride. When he spoke to me, his words were careful, restrained, as if he were managing a responsibility instead of speaking to his mother. I had raised him alone for many years, not because his father didn't exist, but because life has a way of pulling people apart and leaving women to carry what remains. I worked extra hours. I skipped meals so he wouldn't have to. I told myself it was temporary, that one day, when he was grown, I would rest. I didn't realize that rest would feel like abandonment. The first holiday I spent alone after his marriage, I didn't tell anyone. I cooked anyway, set the table anyway. Old habits don't die easily. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting it to open, half afraid it wouldn't. When the food grew cold, I packed it away and ate standing up, because sitting down felt too final. Later that evening, he called. He sounded happy. Loud voices echoed in the background, laughter that didn't include me. He told me they were at her parents' house, that everyone said hello. I waited for him to say he wished I were there. He didn't. I told him I was tired and ended the call early. I sat in the dark after, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, wondering how a house that once felt full could now feel so empty with the same walls. The forgetting didn't happen all at once. It came in pieces, missed calls, changed plans, conversations that ended too quickly. He still spoke to me, but he no longer spoke with me. I became someone he updated instead of someone he shared with. When I tried to talk about it, gently, carefully, he became defensive. He said I was imagining things, that nothing had changed. That marriage doesn't erase a mother. But his actions told a different story. I wasn't erased. I was replaced, not by his wife, not really, but by her family, by a world where I didn't fit anymore. They lived closer, they were louder, more involved. They expected his presence, and he gave it willingly. With them, he showed up early. With me, he arrived late or not at all. I watched him become the son I had always hoped he would be, just not to me. One afternoon, I stopped by his house unannounced, something I had never done before. I brought food like I used to when he was younger. I told myself it was normal, that mothers do this. When he opened the door, his smile froze for a fraction of a second before returning. That fraction broke my heart. Inside, the house felt unfamiliar, not because it was new, but because there was no space for me in it. Photos lined the walls. Not one included me. Family portraits, holidays, birthdays, all her family, all smiling, all framed. I didn't say anything. I smiled, complimented the decor, sat where I was told, left early. In the car, my hands shook as I turned the key. That night, I cried quietly, not because I wanted him back the way he was, but because I finally understood something I had been refusing to see. He had made a choice, and I wasn't part of it. I tried harder after that. I adjusted myself, lowered expectations. I told myself that love means letting go, that a good mother doesn't compete for attention, that my role was to support from the sidelines. But there is a difference between letting go and being pushed aside. When his wife's family needed help, he rearranged his schedule. When I asked for a ride to a doctor's appointment, he suggested alternatives. When they hosted gatherings, he attended without question. When I invited him, he checked his calendar. And every time he chose them, he forgot me a little more. I stopped calling first, not out of pride, out of exhaustion. I wanted to see if he would notice the silence the way I had. Days passed, then weeks. When he finally called, it was to ask for a favor. I said yes. Of course I did. Mothers are trained to say yes even when it hurts. But after I hung up, I realized something terrifying. He hadn't forgotten me by accident. He had simply learned that I would always be there, no matter how little space he gave me. And that realization hurt more than loneliness ever could. After that realization settled in, I didn't change overnight. People like to believe there's a single moment when strength arrives and everything becomes clear. For me, it was slower, like learning to walk again after years of standing still. I kept moving the way I always had, but something inside me had shifted. I was no longer reaching blindly. I was watching. I began to notice how often I adjusted myself to fit into the small spaces he left for me. How I rehearsed conversations in my head so I wouldn't sound needy. How I shortened my sentences so he wouldn't feel obligated to stay on the phone. How I laughed at jokes that quietly excluded me. I had been shrinking without realizing it. The next time I invited him over, I chose my words carefully. I didn't ask for a whole day, just lunch, something simple. He said he'd check and get back to me. That phrase used to sound reasonable. Now it sounded like postponement disguised as politeness. He got back to me 2 days later. He said they already had plans with her family, maybe another time. I said I understood. I always said that. That afternoon I walked past a mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back at me. Her shoulders were slightly hunched, as if she were apologizing to the world for taking up space. Her eyes looked tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. I realized I hadn't asked myself how I felt in a long time. I had been too busy trying to be convenient. A few days later, I overheard a conversation that I wasn't meant to hear. He had left his phone on speaker while stepping into another room. His wife's voice carried easily. "She's too attached," she said. "You need boundaries." I froze. He didn't correct her. He murmured something in agreement, something about balance, about moving forward, about how things change. He spoke calmly, reasonably, as if discussing a schedule instead of a person who had given him her life. I stood there, invisible, listening to myself being reduced to an inconvenience. That night, I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I sat with the truth instead, the kind that doesn't shout, but settles heavily in your chest and refuses to move. I wasn't losing him. I had already lost him. The days that followed were strange. I felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because I stopped pretending, heavier because pretending had been my shield. Without it, everything felt exposed. I stopped calling first. At first it felt like holding my breath. I kept expecting him to notice, to reach out, to ask if something was wrong. But days passed quietly, then a week, then more. When he did call, it was brief, practical. He asked how I was. I said fine. He didn't press. That hurt more than if he had argued. I began to see how conditional my presence had become in his life. I existed in the margins, in the gaps between plans, in the moments when nothing else demanded his attention. I remembered a time when he used to run to me with every thought, every worry, every small victory. Back then, I was his first call. Now, I was an afterthought. I wondered when that change had happened. Was it sudden, or had it been happening quietly all along, like erosion? One afternoon, I attended a small gathering with friends. Someone asked about my family, and for the first time I didn't rush to defend my son. I simply said, "He's busy with his life." The words felt neutral, honest, free of excuses. That honesty surprised me. As weeks turned into months, something unexpected happened. I began to enjoy the quiet, not the lonely kind, but the peaceful kind. The kind where you don't feel like you're waiting to be chosen. I filled my time differently. I walked more. I read. I reconnected with parts of myself that had been put away for later. I stopped shaping my days around the possibility of his call, and with that shift came clarity. I saw how often I had accepted emotional neglect because it came wrapped in politeness, how I had mistaken absence for independence, how I had told myself that loving someone meant accepting less than I deserved. One evening he called unexpectedly. His voice was strained. "We need to talk," he said. Those words used to make my heart race. Now they simply landed. He talked about pressure, about expectations from both sides, about how hard it was to balance two families. He said he felt pulled, stretched thin, exhausted. I listened. When he finished, there was a pause. "I don't want to lose you," he said. The words sounded sincere, but sincerity without action is just sound. "I don't want to be something you manage," I replied calmly. "I want to be someone you choose." He didn't answer right away. That silence told me everything. We ended the call politely, no resolution, no argument, just distance, acknowledged. Afterward, I sat quietly and realized something that both hurt and healed at the same time. I had spent so long trying to stay relevant in his life that I forgot to remain present in my own. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done chasing. And that decision, quiet as it was, changed everything. Setting boundaries sounds simple when people talk about it. They say it like it's just a decision, like flipping a switch. But when you've spent years measuring your worth by how needed you are, boundaries feel like betrayal. Not of others, of the version of yourself that survived by being available. I didn't announce my boundaries. I didn't send a message explaining my feelings or list my expectations. I simply changed my behavior, quietly, consistently. When he called and spoke in a rush, I didn't stretch the conversation just to feel included. I let it end naturally. When he suggested dates that only worked for him, I checked my own schedule honestly instead of rearranging it. When invitations came late, I declined without apology. At first, he didn't notice. Then he did. He began asking if something was wrong. I told him the truth, without drama. I said I was focusing on my life, that I was learning to slow down, that I didn't always have the energy to adjust at the last minute. He laughed once and said, "You've changed." "Yes," I replied, "I had to." That unsettled him. People get comfortable when you are predictable, even when predictability costs you something. My change disrupted a balance he didn't realize depended on my silence. The resistance came subtly at first. Jokes about me being distant, comments about me being sensitive, casual reminders of how things used to be. He wasn't cruel, he was confused, and confusion often turns into frustration when it isn't addressed. One evening he said, "You know, they've been saying you don't really want to be involved anymore." That word carried weight. "I want to be involved where I'm wanted," I said. He sighed. "They don't mean it like that." "I'm sure," I replied. "But meaning doesn't change how it feels." There was a long pause. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said. I felt the old instinct rise, the urge to smooth things over, to say I was sorry, to promise I'd try harder. I didn't. I'm making it honest, I said. That was the first time I felt him pull back emotionally instead of me. Not out of anger, but discomfort. Honesty shifts responsibility, and not everyone is ready to carry it. Weeks passed with limited contact. Not hostile, just sparse. I used that time to sit with my choices, to question myself honestly. Was I protecting my heart or punishing him? Was I being fair or reactive? The answer surprised me. I wasn't doing anything to him. I was doing something for myself. One afternoon he showed up unexpectedly, not angry, not defensive, just unsure. He stood in my doorway like he used to when he was younger, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. You don't need to stand there, I said gently. Come in. He did. We sat across from each other, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Then he said, I didn't realize how much you were stepping aside. I waited. I thought you were okay with it, he continued. You never said anything. I didn't want to make you uncomfortable, I said. I thought that was my job. He frowned. It's not. Then why did it feel like it was, I asked. He didn't have an answer. That silence wasn't empty. It was heavy with recognition. For the first time, he wasn't defending himself. He was listening. I didn't stop caring about you, he said quietly. I just got used to you being there no matter what. There it was, the truth neither of us had named. I stopped being there no matter what, I said. Not because I love you less, but because I love myself more. He nodded slowly, like someone seeing a familiar room in a new light. I don't know how to balance this, he admitted. You don't have to figure it out all at once, I said. Just don't ask me to disappear to make it easier. That was the boundary. Clear, calm, unmovable. When he left that day, nothing was fixed. But something had shifted. The dynamic was no longer built on my quiet sacrifice. It was standing on truth now, uncertain and fragile, but real. That night, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief, not because he had chosen me, but because I had. And whatever came next, I knew I would meet it without shrinking myself again. The change didn't go unnoticed for long. When one person stops bending, everyone who relied on that flexibility feels it. At first, the reactions were indirect. Missed calls that weren't returned, invitations that came with an edge of formality, conversations that felt careful, as if every word was being measured. Then the comments started reaching me through him. They think you're upset with them. They feel like you don't want to be part of things anymore. They don't understand why you're being distant. I listened without interrupting, not because I agreed, but because I wanted to hear how he framed it. Every sentence placed me slightly outside the circle, as if my feelings were an inconvenience rather than a response. I'm not distant, I said calmly. I'm present where there's space for me. He rubbed his forehead. You know how they are. They take things personally. I took things personally for years, I replied, quietly. That was when the tension sharpened. One weekend there was a gathering, a celebration on her side of the family. He called to tell me about it casually, almost as an afterthought. I waited. He didn't invite me. Are you going? I asked. Yes, he said. Everyone will be there. I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. And me? I asked gently. There was a pause that answered before he spoke. I didn't think you'd want to, he said. That old familiar ache surfaced, the one that comes when decisions are made for you in the name of comfort, not yours, theirs. I wasn't asked, I said, so there was no choice to make. He exhaled. It's complicated. It's only complicated when honesty is uncomfortable, I replied. This time, he sounded irritated. Why are you making everything a problem? That question stung more than anger ever could, because it suggested that my presence itself was the issue. I'm not making a problem, I said slowly. I'm responding to one. The gathering happened without me. I didn't sulk. I didn't call. I didn't wait by the phone. I spent the day with myself, doing things I'd postponed for years because I thought being available was more important than being fulfilled. And something unexpected happened. I felt peaceful, not numb, not bitter. Peaceful. That frightened him more than any argument could have. A few days later, he came over again. This time, he wasn't unsure. He was defensive. His shoulders were tense, his voice clipped. "They feel judged by you," he said before even sitting down. I looked at him carefully. "How? They say you don't make an effort anymore." I almost smiled, but didn't. "Effort isn't measured by disappearance," I said. "It's measured by mutual care. They're my family now," he said sharply. I held his gaze. "And I stopped being yours?" "That's not what I meant," he replied quickly. "But it's what you said," I answered. Silence filled the room, thick and uncomfortable. He stood up, pacing slightly. "Why can't you just let things be?" he asked. "Why does everything have to change? Because staying the same was breaking me." I didn't say it aloud. I didn't need to. The truth was already sitting between us. "I did let things be," I said quietly, "for a long time, and in doing that I lost myself." He stopped pacing. "I don't want to choose," he said. I nodded. "I know, and you're making it feel like I have to." "No," I replied gently. "I'm making it clear that I won't disappear, so you don't have to feel uncomfortable." That landed harder than any accusation. He looked at me then, really looked, as if seeing the cost of his comfort for the first time. His voice softened. "They don't understand you like I do," he said. "Then help them," I replied, "or at least don't ask me to pay for it." That was the moment I realized something important. This wasn't about them. It was about him, about the ease he found in one place and the responsibility he felt in another, about how silence had always been the solution, until silence stopped working. After that conversation, things changed again, not for the better, not immediately. He became more distant, less communicative, not cruel but careful, as if proximity itself required negotiation, and I let him. That was the hardest part. Letting someone you love walk into distance without chasing them, without reminding them of everything you've done, without pleading for space in their life. I told myself the truth every morning. If love only survives when I erase myself, then it isn't love. It's dependency. Weeks passed, then months. The silence taught me things no conversation ever had. It showed me who reached out when nothing was required. It revealed how conditional presence can be. It forced me to build a life that didn't wait for permission. And when he finally returned, his voice sounded different, quieter, more honest. He said, "I think I messed up." I didn't rush to comfort him. I listened. Because this time, the choice wasn't about keeping peace. It was about keeping myself. When he said he thought he had messed up, I didn't answer right away. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because I needed to understand what he meant by it. Regret can come from guilt, or it can come from fear. One seeks repair, the other seeks comfort. I didn't know how to handle it, he admitted after a moment. I thought if I stayed quiet, things would settle. I nodded slowly. They always did before. "Yes," he said, and for the first time, his voice carried weight. "Because you absorbed it." We sat with that truth, unguarded. No one rushed to fill the silence. It felt different now, not heavy, but honest. "They started asking questions," he continued. "Why you don't come around? Why you don't call like you used to? Why you seem distant?" "And what did you say?" I asked. He looked away. At first, nothing. Then I said you were busy. Then I said you needed space. And when that wasn't enough, I told them you felt pushed aside. The words hung in the air. "And?" I asked. They didn't like that. I let out a small breath. "Of course not." "They said you were being dramatic," he said quietly. "That you were trying to make things about you." I felt the familiar sting, but it didn't sink in like it once would have. Pain loses some of its power when you stop arguing with it. "What did you say then?" I asked. He swallowed. I said maybe we all needed to listen more." I looked at him, surprised. "That didn't go over well," he added. I could imagine it. The discomfort, the defensiveness, the way accountability feels like accusation to people who have never had to consider it. "They asked me why I was changing," he said. "Why I was suddenly acting like you needed special treatment." "And?" I asked again. He met my eyes. "I told them you weren't asking for special treatment. You were asking not to be invisible. Something in my chest loosened. They said I was choosing sides, he continued, that I was letting you interfere. And how did that make you feel? I asked. Angry, he said without hesitation. And ashamed. Why ashamed? I asked gently. Because I realized how easy it had been to let you feel like the problem, he said. Because it kept everything else calm. That was the truth I'd waited years to hear, even though I didn't know it then. I didn't want to be the source of tension, he said, so I let you carry it. I nodded. I know. He looked at me, startled. You do? Yes, I said softly. That's why I stopped. There was no accusation in my voice, no bitterness. Just clarity. I can't promise I'll handle this perfectly, he said. But I don't want to lose you. I leaned back, studying him. Losing me doesn't start with distance, I said. It starts when I'm only welcome if I stay quiet. He nodded, absorbing it. I told them I needed time, he said. Time to figure out how to do this without hurting you or them. And how did they respond? I asked. He hesitated. They said I was overthinking, that this wouldn't be an issue if you were more understanding. I smiled sadly. Understanding has limits. He laughed softly, without humor. That's what I said. That moment wasn't a victory. It wasn't reconciliation. It was recognition. And recognition changes the shape of things. I don't expect you to fight battles for me, I said, but I won't be the cost of avoiding them. He nodded again. I need to rebuild trust, he said, not just with you, with myself. That mattered more than any apology. After he left, I sat alone and reflected on how far we'd come. Not closer exactly, but clearer. And clarity is the foundation of anything real. Love isn't proven by proximity, it's proven by consideration. By who you protect when things get uncomfortable. By whether you ask someone to shrink so you can stand taller. I didn't know how this story would end, I still don't. But I knew this much. I would no longer disappear to make someone else's life easier. And if he chose to walk beside me now, it would be because he saw me, not because I stayed silent. Honesty doesn't arrive quietly. It echoes. It rearranges rooms people were comfortable leaving untouched. Once he spoke the truth out loud, he couldn't pull it back, and neither could anyone pretend not to hear it. The distance between us didn't close after that conversation. If anything, it changed shape. It became deliberate, measured, as if both of us were learning how to walk on unfamiliar ground without falling back into old habits. He called more often, but the calls were different, slower, less rushed. He listened instead of multitasking. Sometimes there were pauses where neither of us spoke, and for the first time they didn't feel like gaps to be filled. They felt like space being respected, but on his side the cost was becoming clear. He told me how the atmosphere had shifted, how questions followed him into rooms, how jokes were made at his expense, how concern was wrapped in criticism, the kind that pretends to care while tightening its grip. They say I'm changing, he said one evening, that I'm pulling away. And are you? I asked. I think I am, he replied. From what hurts you. I let that settle. That's not pulling away, I said. That's choosing where you stand. He sighed. They don't see it that way. They don't have to, I said. But you do. The tension reached a point where avoidance stopped working. There was a conversation he could no longer delay, one where neutrality wouldn't be enough, one where silence would speak louder than any defense. He didn't tell me beforehand. I found out after. They asked me directly, he said, his voice low, if I was putting you before them. I closed my eyes, imagining the moment, the pressure, the expectation of an easy answer. And what did you say? I asked. I said I wasn't putting anyone before anyone, he replied. I said I was refusing to put you beneath them. My chest tightened. That didn't go well, he added. I could hear the weight in his voice. The cost of standing still in a room that demands allegiance. They said I was being influenced, he continued, that you were trying to create distance. And, I asked gently. I said the distance was already there, he said. I just stopped pretending it wasn't. That admission marked a turning point, not because it solved anything, but because it removed the illusion that peace could be maintained without consequence. After that, He withdrew for a while. Not from me, but from the noise. He spent less time there, more time alone, more time thinking. I didn't fill that space. I didn't check in to see how he was holding up. I trusted him to carry what he'd chosen to hold. That was another boundary. One night he called me late. His voice sounded tired, stripped of defensiveness. "I don't know where I belong right now," he said. "You belong wherever you don't have to erase parts of yourself," I replied. He was quiet for a long time. "I didn't realize how much I was erasing," he said finally. "Not just you. Me." That realization comes with grief. Grief for the version of life you thought you were maintaining, only to see it was built on compromise you never examined. "They want things to go back to normal," he said. "They say this tension is unnecessary." "Normal for whom?" I asked. "For them," he admitted. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. "I can't unsee it now," he said. "How easy it was when you stayed quiet. How hard it is now that you're visible." "That doesn't mean visibility is wrong," I said. "I know," he replied. "It just means it costs more." We ended the call without resolution, without promises, without certainty. But something had shifted again, not toward comfort, toward truth. And truth doesn't rush. It waits to see who is willing to stand with it when the room grows quiet and the choices become clear. I went to sleep that night knowing one thing. Whatever he chose next, I would not follow him back into silence. The breaking point didn't arrive with shouting or slammed doors. It came quietly, the way most irreversible moments do. A decision made without consulting him. A plan announced instead of discussed. A familiar pattern resurfacing as if nothing had changed. He told me about it afterward. "They planned a gathering," he said, "a big one. They assumed we'd both be there. I waited. When I asked why no one talked to you about it," he continued, "they said they didn't think it was necessary." My hands tightened in my lap. "They said if you wanted to come, you would," he added, "that they didn't want to tiptoe. Tiptoe. That word had always meant consideration when it benefited them, and inconvenience when it didn't." "And what did you say?" I asked. "I said that not inviting someone isn't the same as giving them a choice," he replied. "I said ignoring you wasn't neutrality. I felt a wave of sadness more than anger, the sadness of recognizing a pattern that refuses to change, no matter how clearly it's named. They accused me of prioritizing you again," he said, "of letting you create distance." "And then?" I asked. He exhaled slowly. "I said the distance existed long before I acknowledged it." There it was, the line he hadn't crossed before. "They told me I was being disrespectful," he continued, "that I was forgetting where I came from." I closed my eyes. "And what did you do?" I asked quietly. "I left," he said, just one word. It carried weight. He didn't storm out. He didn't argue further. He didn't try to explain himself into exhaustion. He stood up, said he needed space, and walked away from a room that expected his compliance. "I've never done that before," he said. "I always stayed. I knew." That night, I sat with what his leaving meant. Not as proof of loyalty, not as a victory, but as a signal that something fundamental had shifted. When he came over the next day, he looked different, lighter in some ways, worn in others. "I don't want to live like this," he said, choosing peace over honesty, apologies over accountability. I studied him. "What does living differently look like to you?" He hesitated. "I don't know yet, but I know it can't include asking you to be smaller." Those words mattered, not because they guaranteed anything, but because they acknowledged the cost of the old arrangement. "They want me to fix this," he said, "to smooth it over." "And how would you do that?" I asked. "By asking you to come back quietly," he admitted, "by pretending nothing happened." "And will you?" I asked. He shook his head. "I can't." That was the moment neutrality failed completely, because once you see the imbalance, you can't unsee it. "They say I'm creating division," he said. "Boundaries feel like division to people who benefited from your lack of them," I replied. He smiled faintly. "You've changed too." "Yes," I said, "and so have you. But change isn't a straight line. It curves. It doubles back. It tests resolve. The pressure didn't stop. Messages came, appeals wrapped in concern, reminders of loyalty, of obligation, of tradition. He told me he felt pulled in every direction. "I'm afraid of losing them," he admitted one evening. "And what about losing yourself?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. "That's what I've been doing," he said finally, "losing myself slowly, so no one else had to feel uncomfortable." I reached across the table, not to fix him, not to reassure him, but to acknowledge the truth he was finally willing to say. "I won't ask you to choose me," I said, "but I won't be an option you only remember when it's convenient." He nodded. That night, after he left, I cried, not from fear, from release, from knowing that whatever happened next would be real, not maintained by my silence. Some relationships survive honesty, some don't. But all relationships reveal themselves when honesty is no longer optional, and we were standing at that edge now. The fallout didn't explode. It settled in, heavy and unavoidable, like dust after a collapse. Nothing dramatic happened at first. No final words, no ultimatums spoken aloud. Just an absence where assumptions used to live. He stopped attending certain gatherings. Not all, just the ones where my absence was treated as irrelevant. The ones where silence was expected from me and compliance from him. That alone was enough to shift the tone. Questions turned into accusations. Concern hardened into judgment. The language changed. Less "we miss you" and more "you've changed." Less "let's talk" and more "this isn't how family behaves." He didn't repeat their words to me with anger. He repeated them with clarity. "They say I'm choosing conflict," he told me, "that I'm making things difficult for no reason." "And what do you think?" I asked. "I think comfort was being mistaken for peace," he replied. That answer mattered. The strain began showing in ways neither of us had expected. He became quieter, more introspective. I became steadier, more grounded. The roles were shifting. For years, I had been the one absorbing discomfort. Now he was learning what it felt like to hold it without outsourcing the weight. "I didn't realize how much emotional labor you were doing," he said one afternoon. "I thought things just worked." "They worked because I worked," I replied, without resentment. He nodded. There were days he didn't call, not out of avoidance but exhaustion. Days when I wondered if this distance would grow into something permanent. I let those thoughts come and go without chasing reassurance. That was new. One evening he came over unexpectedly. He looked tired, not just physically, but in the way people look when their inner map no longer matches their surroundings. "They told me I'm not welcome there if I keep pushing this," he said. I didn't react. I didn't ask who said it. I didn't need details. "And how did that make you feel?" I asked. "Relieved," he admitted. "And scared." "Both can be true," I said. "They want me to choose," he continued, fully, not halfway. I inhaled slowly. "And what does choosing mean to you?" He thought for a long moment. "It means I can't keep asking you to pay for my comfort," he said, "and I can't keep pretending I don't see it." That was the moment separation became real, not between us, between him and the version of family that required silence to function. "I don't know what happens next," he said. "I don't know how long this lasts. I don't need timelines," I replied. "I need honesty." He nodded. The days that followed were quiet, heavy but clear. He spent more time alone, less time explaining himself. The noise faded, replaced by something more difficult. Stillness, and in that stillness, truth surfaced. He told me one night that he missed the ease, the familiarity, the way things used to be. "So do I said, "but ease shouldn't come at the cost of erasing someone." "I know," he replied. "I just wish I'd known sooner. Regret doesn't fix the past, but it can shape the future. I didn't celebrate his discomfort. I didn't treat his struggle as proof of loyalty. I respected it as growth. And growth is lonely. People will tell you you're wrong when you stop playing the role that kept them comfortable. They will call you difficult when you stop being convenient. They will say you've changed when they can no longer ignore you." He was learning that now, and so was I. The separation wasn't loud, it was honest. And honesty doesn't ask permission. The turning point came when avoidance stopped being an option, when the silence grew too loud to ignore and the space between conversations demanded explanation. He didn't plan the moment. It found him. They asked to meet. Not as a group. One voice at a time, each carrying the same message wrapped in different words. Concern, confusion, disappointment, an invitation to clear the air, which really meant restore the old order. He told me about it before he went. I don't know what they want to hear, he said. They want reassurance that nothing has really changed, I replied. But something has. He nodded. When he came back, he looked like someone who had finally said things out loud that had been sitting in his chest for years. His posture was straighter, his eyes steadier. I told them I wouldn't ask you to come back quietly, he said. I told them I wouldn't explain your absence as a problem anymore. I felt my throat tighten. They said you were creating distance between us, he continued. I said the distance was already there. I was just acknowledging it. What did they say then? I asked. They said if this continues, things won't be the same. I met his gaze. They already aren't. He let out a breath that sounded like relief. I told them family isn't about proximity, he said. It's about how people are treated when they're present. That sentence carried more weight than he realized. They asked me why I couldn't just keep things peaceful, he continued, why I had to make it complicated. And? I asked. I said peace that depends on someone staying silent isn't peace, he replied. It's control. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He stated it plainly. That ended the conversation, not because they agreed, but because there was nothing left to debate. After that, communication slowed, not abruptly, gradually. Messages became shorter. Invitations became conditional. The emotional temperature cooled. He grieved that, not openly, quietly. In the spaces between words. In the way he paused before speaking. In the way he sometimes stared at nothing, lost in the weight of what he'd let go. I didn't rush him through it. Loss doesn't need solutions, it needs room. One evening he said, I didn't realize how much of my life was built on not upsetting anyone. And how does it feel now? I asked. Unsteady, he admitted, but honest. Honesty has a cost, but it also has a grounding effect. It aligns your inner world with your outer actions. I don't blame them, he said. They did what worked for them, and you did what worked for you, I replied. He nodded slowly. I don't know what our relationship looks like now, he said. With them, with you. I thought about that. With me, I said, it looks like mutual respect. Or it doesn't exist. He didn't flinch. That's fair, he said. The truth is, choosing differently doesn't guarantee acceptance. It guarantees integrity. And integrity reshapes every relationship it touches. He didn't choose me over them. He chose to stop choosing comfort over conscience. And that changed everything. Because for the first time, I wasn't waiting to see if I mattered. I knew, not because he stayed, but because he stood. The quiet that followed was different from the silences before. It wasn't tense. It wasn't waiting to explode. It simply existed, steady and unbothered, like a room after people have finally stopped arguing and left the truth behind them. We didn't rush to define what we were now. There were no dramatic declarations, no promises to rebuild everything overnight. That kind of urgency belonged to the old version of us, the one that believed closeness had to be constantly proven or it would disappear. Instead, we let things be what they were. Some days we talked. Some days we didn't. When we did, the conversations were slower, more intentional. He didn't multitask while listening. I didn't soften my words to make them easier to hear. We spoke like two people learning each other again, without the weight of expectations pressing down on every sentence. He told me about the loneliness he hadn't expected, how choosing honesty didn't automatically replace what he lost, how standing his ground felt empowering and isolating at the same time. I thought doing the right thing would feel clearer, he admitted one evening. But sometimes it just feels empty. Empty isn't always bad, I said. Sometimes it's space. That idea stayed with him. Over time, the messages from the other side grew fewer, not because everything was resolved, but because control loses interest when it stops working. Distance became normalized, not celebrated, not dramatized, just accepted. He stopped explaining himself. That was new. He didn't defend his choices or justify his absence. When asked why things had changed, he answered simply, because they needed to. No elaboration, no apologies. And surprisingly, the world didn't end. Life went on in quieter ways. Holidays were smaller, gatherings were simpler, there were moments of sadness, yes. Grief doesn't disappear just because clarity arrives, but the grief was honest now, not buried beneath forced smiles and swallowed discomfort. As for me, something inside me settled. I stopped waking up with that familiar knot in my chest, the one that used to tighten whenever I thought about being forgotten, replaced, or quietly excluded. I stopped rehearsing conversations that never happened. I stopped hoping someone would suddenly realize my worth without being told. I had already realized it myself. That changed everything. One afternoon, months later, he came over without calling first. Not anxious, not conflicted, just present. He sat down and said, "I think I finally understand something." I waited. I thought family was about loyalty, he said, about staying aligned no matter what. But I think real family is about protection, about who makes sure you don't disappear. I didn't respond right away. I let the words find their place. "I didn't protect you," he continued, "not when it mattered. I thought staying neutral was kindness. It felt like abandonment," I said gently. "I know," he replied, "and I live with that." There was no defensiveness in his voice, no attempt to excuse himself, just accountability. "I don't expect forgiveness," he added. "I just want to be different now. I don't need perfection," I said. "I need consistency." He nodded. "Then that's what I'll offer." And he did. Not in grand gestures, not in public declarations, in small, steady ways. Calling when he said he would, including me without hesitation, speaking up when silence would have been easier. There were still uncomfortable moments, still awkward pauses, still reminders of what had been lost. Healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning how to live with it, without letting it define every step forward. We didn't return to what we were. We became something else, something more honest, something less performative, something real. I realized then that I had spent years equating love with endurance, believing that if I could just tolerate enough, adapt enough, stay quiet enough, I would earn my place. But love isn't proven by how much pain you can survive in silence. It's proven by how little pain you are willing to ignore. I no longer waited to be chosen. I chose myself, and in doing so, I taught him how to choose differently too. Not everyone came back. Some relationships remained distant, polite, but shallow, and that was okay. Not every connection is meant to be restored. Some are meant to be understood, learned from, and released. Family stopped being a fixed circle and became something more fluid, defined not by obligation, but by care. And in that redefinition, I found peace. Not because everything worked out perfectly, but because I no longer betrayed myself to keep the illusion of harmony alive. If there's one thing I know now,